Am I wrong for walking out of my own wedding after my in-laws played a prank on me? I have always believed in the importance of respect and boundaries, especially when it comes to family relationships. My husband and I have been together for 4 years, and while our relationship has had its ups and downs, I thought we had built a solid foundation. However, his family has always been a bit of a wild card. They love pulling pranks, and while some of them are harmless, others cross the line. I have always been wary of being their target, and my husband knows how I feel about it. Leading up to the wedding, I made it clear to my husband that I wanted our special day to be free of any jokes or pranks. He assured me that he had spoken to his family and that they understood my wishes. I trusted him, thinking we were on the same page. Little did I know, I was walking into a nightmare. The day of the wedding started beautifully. I woke up feeling nervous but excited. My bridesmaids and I spent the morning getting ready, laughing, and reminiscing. Everything seemed perfect. When it was time for the ceremony, I walked down the aisle, heart pounding, and saw my soon-to-be husband waiting for me with a smile. My nerves melted away as I looked into his eyes, believing that this was the beginning of our happily ever after. After I read my heartfelt vows to him, pouring out my love and commitment, it was his turn. But as he started speaking, my world came crashing down. Instead of the meaningful vows I expected, he began reading a set of crude and childish joke vows, filled with inappropriate remarks and inside jokes that only he and his groomsmen would find funny. The guests were stunned. I could hear scattered laughter from his side of the aisle, but most people sat in awkward silence. My heart sank as I realized this was not a mistake, he had planned this. I stood there frozen, trying to process what was happening. When he finished his so-called vows with a grin, he looked at me as if expecting me to laugh along. My cheeks burned with embarrassment as I felt the eyes of every guest on me. I wanted to scream, cry, or run, but I forced myself to stay composed until the ceremony was over. As soon as the ceremony ended, I pulled him aside and demanded to know what he was thinking. He shrugged and said he had seen a similar prank online and thought it would be funny. He told me he believed I would laugh and find it entertaining, especially since his family has a fun-loving sense of humor. I was speechless. How could he think it was appropriate to humiliate me on what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives? His family's reaction only made things worse. His mother brushed it off, saying it was just a joke and that I needed to have a sense of humor if I wanted to fit into their family. His father laughed and said he was proud of his son for pulling off such a hilarious stunt. His siblings and groomsmen chimed in, calling me too uptight and saying I had ruined the fun. I felt completely blindsided and unsupported. Meanwhile, my family was livid. My mom was practically shaking with anger, and my dad had to restrain himself from confronting my husband right then and there. My bridesmaids rallied around me, trying to shield me from the onslaught of comments from his family. I felt humiliated, betrayed, and utterly alone. I decided I could not go through with the reception. I walked out of the venue, leaving my husband and his family stunned. My bridesmaids followed me, and we went back to the hotel where we had been getting ready earlier that day. I broke down in tears, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This was supposed to be our special day, and it had turned into a nightmare. The aftermath was chaotic. My phone blew up with calls and messages from guests, my in-laws, and my husband. Some people sided with me, saying they could not believe how disrespectful the prank was. Others, mostly his family and their friends, accused me of overreacting and ruining the wedding. My husband showed up at my apartment a few days later with flowers and an apology. He said he did not realize how much the prank would upset me and that he thought I would get the joke. He admitted that his family had encouraged him, but he took full responsibility for going along with it. I told him that his apology was a start, but I needed to understand why he thought it was acceptable to humiliate me in front of everyone. He said he thought it was a way to break the tension and make the day more memorable. I could not believe his reasoning. I asked him if he truly understood how hurtful and disrespectful his actions were. He claimed he did, but I could tell he still thought I had overreacted. As for his family, they continued to defend their actions. His mother called me to say that I was too sensitive and that their family shows love through humor. I told her there is a difference between humor and humiliation, and what they did was not love. She hung up on me, and I have not heard from her since. The fallout from the prank has been immense. Many of the guests who witnessed the ceremony reached out to express their shock and support. Some even told me they had no idea how to react in the moment and felt secondhand embarrassment for me. My husband and I are currently living apart while I figure out whether our marriage can be salvaged. Trust has been broken, and I am not sure if it can be repaired. His family's refusal to take accountability has only made things worse. They continue to paint me as the villain, claiming that I ruined the wedding by walking out. Meanwhile, my own family has rallied around me, offering their unwavering support. They have encouraged me to take my time and not feel pressured to make any decisions about the future of my marriage. My friends have been a source of comfort as well, reminding me that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness. As I reflect on what happened, I cannot help but feel a mix of sadness and anger. I wanted our wedding day to be a celebration of love and commitment, but instead, it became a spectacle of humiliation. I do not know what the future holds, but one thing is certain: I will not tolerate being disrespected or made to feel small, no matter who is responsible. Update. A few weeks after the wedding fiasco, I was starting to get back on my feet emotionally. My husband was still trying to reconcile, sending flowers and messages asking for another chance. His family, on the other hand, had gone eerily quiet. I assumed they were trying to let the dust settle. I was wrong. One evening, I came home from work to find chaos in my front yard. My in-laws had decided to pull another prank to lighten the mood and prove they were fun-loving. They had broken onto my property, plastering toilet paper all over the trees, sprinkling glitter in my driveway, and putting a giant inflatable clown on my front lawn. But the worst part? They had painted "Lighten Up" in huge letters across my garage door. I was furious. This was not just childish behavior, it was trespassing and vandalism. I immediately called the police, who arrived quickly and took my statement. My in-laws were still there when the officers arrived, laughing and recording the mess they had made on their phones. When the police informed them they were trespassing, their laughter stopped. My mother-in-law started yelling that I was overreacting again and that it was just a prank. She claimed I was trying to make them look bad and tear the family apart. My father-in-law accused me of being vindictive and said I needed to learn to take a joke. They refused to leave until the police escorted them off the property. The following day, I went to the station and filed charges for trespassing and vandalism. I also hired a cleaning crew to deal with the mess they had left behind. As I stood there watching the crew scrub glitter off my driveway and repaint my garage door, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. How could they think this was acceptable behavior, especially after everything that had already happened? When my husband found out about the charges, he showed up at my house, begging me to drop them. He said his parents were just trying to mend fences in their own way and that I was blowing things out of proportion. I told him that his family's idea of mending fences was toxic and that I would not tolerate being disrespected in my own home. The situation escalated further when my in-laws started a smear campaign against me on social media. They posted videos of their prank, framing it as harmless fun and accusing me of being uptight and vindictive. Their friends and extended family members began harassing me online, sending me hateful messages and calling me names. It was overwhelming, but I refused to back down. I consulted with a lawyer to explore my options, and they confirmed that I had every right to press charges and pursue legal action. The lawyer also advised me to get a restraining order, which I did. The restraining order prohibited my in-laws from coming near my home or contacting me directly. It felt like a necessary step to protect myself, especially since their behavior was becoming more erratic and invasive. As all of this unfolded, I started to reevaluate my marriage. My husband had repeatedly failed to stand up for me or set boundaries with his family. He continued to downplay their actions, and his pleas for reconciliation felt hollow. I realized that staying in this relationship would mean constantly being at odds with his family and never feeling truly supported. The breaking point came during a conversation with him about the charges I had filed. He accused me of being too dramatic and said I was tearing apart the family by involving the police. When I reminded him that his family had trespassed, vandalized my property, and humiliated me publicly, he shrugged and said, "That's just how they are. You need to get used to it." That was it. I told him I could not stay married to someone who prioritized his family's toxic behavior over my well-being. I told him I wanted an annulment. His face fell, but instead of fighting for our marriage, he muttered something about me being impossible to please and left. The annulment process was emotionally exhausting but also liberating. My lawyer helped me navigate the paperwork, and my family and friends supported me every step of the way. My in-laws continued their smear campaign, but I stopped engaging. I blocked them on all platforms and focused on moving forward. In the months that followed, I started therapy to process everything I had been through. I realized how much I had compromised myself to try to fit into a family that never respected me. The experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries and refusing to tolerate toxic behavior, no matter who it comes from. As for my ex, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he moved back in with his parents. His family is still bitter about the annulment and blames me for breaking their son's heart. But I know the truth: their inability to respect boundaries and my ex's failure to stand by me were what truly ended the marriage. Looking back, I am grateful I walked away. It was not easy, but it was the right decision. I deserve a partner who values and respects me, and I refuse to settle for anything less. I refused to let my sister wear our deceased mom's wedding dress. My mom passed away 3 years ago, and it left a huge hole in my life. She and I were incredibly close, and she always promised me that her wedding dress would be mine one day. She used to tell me stories about how my grandma passed it down to her, and how she dreamed of it staying in the family. She even left a letter saying that it was meant for me to wear on my wedding day if I wanted to. The dress is beautiful. It is vintage, delicate, and timeless. I do not know if I will ever get married, but that is not the point. My mom left the dress for me. It is one of the last things I have that connects me to her, and I keep it safely stored in a special garment bag in my closet. Things got complicated when my younger sister Emily got engaged. Emily and I have a complicated relationship. She is bubbly, charming, and effortlessly likable. I love her, but she has always gotten what she wants. I, on the other hand, have always been a bit more reserved and serious. Last month, Emily came over for coffee and casually brought up the dress. She started by reminiscing about our mom and how beautiful she looked on her wedding day. Then she dropped the bomb. She said she wanted to wear mom's wedding dress for her wedding. I was stunned. I told her no. I tried to be polite and firm, explaining that mom left the dress for me. Emily brushed it off and said that it did not matter because I was not even engaged. She insisted that since she was getting married first, it only made sense for her to wear it. I told her again that it was not going to happen. She looked hurt and angry but let it go, or so I thought. A few weeks later, I had a gut feeling to check the dress. It was gone. My heart was racing. I immediately called Emily, but she did not answer. I tried again and again until she finally picked up. I was furious and demanded to know if she took the dress. She denied it at first, but when I threatened to call our dad, she admitted it. Emily said she had the dress because she was going to get it cleaned up for her wedding. I lost it. I yelled at her, calling her selfish and entitled. She started crying, saying I was being unfair and that I would get the dress back after her wedding. She hung up on me, leaving me shaking with rage. I immediately called my dad and told him everything. He tried to calm me down, saying it was probably a misunderstanding. I asked him if he knew Emily took the dress. He sighed and admitted that she had shown it to him earlier that month. He thought I had given her permission. I felt so betrayed. The next day, I showed up at Emily's apartment. I pounded on the door until she let me in. There it was, my mom's wedding dress, hanging on the wall. My jaw dropped. The dress was different. She had altered it. Emily had taken the sleeves off, shortened the train, and added beadwork to the bodice. My heart broke. This was not the same dress anymore. I could not believe she had done this without asking. I turned to Emily, tears streaming down my face. I asked her how she could do this. She rolled her eyes and said I was being dramatic. She said she was modernizing the dress and that mom would have wanted her to wear it. She insisted that the changes made it better and that I should be happy someone was putting it to good use. I snapped. I told her she ruined it. I reminded her that mom left the dress for me and that she had no right to touch it. Emily got defensive, saying I was being petty and selfish. She said the dress belonged to both of us because we were both mom's daughters. I left her apartment shaking with anger and grief. I called my dad again and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time before saying, "It's just a dress." I could not believe it. I told him it was not just a dress, it was one of the last things I had of mom. He told me to let it go and not ruin my relationship with my sister over something material. I felt like no one was on my side. My friends are split. Some of them think I am right to be upset, while others say I should let Emily have her moment because it is just a dress. But I cannot shake the feeling of betrayal. My sister stole something precious, altered it beyond recognition, and expected me to just get over it. Update. I could not keep it to myself anymore. I was heartbroken and angry, so I vented on social media. I posted about how my sister took my mom's wedding dress without permission, altered it, and refused to take responsibility for what she had done. I did not name her directly, but anyone close to us knew who I was talking about. The post blew up. Friends and extended family reached out to me, offering support and expressing their shock over Emily's behavior. Word spread quickly. It turns out that many people were already aware that Emily had taken the dress because she had bragged about it, but they had no idea she had done so without my consent or altered it. The fallout was massive. More than half of Emily's wedding guests pulled out, including some of her closest friends. They said they could not support someone who would do something so selfish and underhanded. Vendors who had not been paid in full started calling her, demanding their deposits, and Emily began to realize just how much money she was losing. Emily showed up at my door the next day, sobbing hysterically. She was in complete meltdown mode, screaming that I had ruined her life. She accused me of humiliating her in front of everyone she knew. She claimed that the post was a deliberate attack on her happiness and demanded that I take it down immediately. I refused. She switched from crying to anger in an instant. She started yelling that I owed her for the wedding losses. She said I had cost her thousands of dollars, and I needed to pay her back for the deposits, the canceled catering, and even the florist. I could not believe what I was hearing. I laughed right in her face and told her she had brought this on herself. At one point, she dropped to her knees on my porch, wailing loudly. She begged me to take the post down and help fix the situation, claiming that her fiancé's family was furious and blaming her for everything. When I stayed firm, she got up, wiped her tears, and stormed off while screaming that I was dead to her. Our dad tried to intervene and called me later that night. He asked if I could be the bigger person and try to smooth things over with Emily. I told him no. I reminded him that she had stolen the dress, altered it without permission, and refused to take any accountability until her reputation and wedding plans started crumbling. I told him that actions have consequences, and Emily needed to learn that. As for the wedding, it was a disaster. It ended up being much smaller than she had planned. Many of her extended family and friends refused to attend, and Emily had to wear a different dress, a rushed rental that she hated. My relationship with her is non-existent right now, but honestly, I do not feel guilty. The dress was one of the last things I had of my mom, and she destroyed it. I will never let anyone make me feel like I was wrong for standing up for myself and for something that mattered so much to me. Emily might still be angry, but at least now she knows that she cannot just take whatever she wants and expect to get away with it. I met my husband, Robert, 6 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. He was charming, attentive, and made me laugh in a way no one else ever had. From that moment on, we were inseparable. A year later, we were married, and for the most part, our life together had been idyllic. We shared dreams of starting a family, building a future, and growing old together. But, as I would later learn, Robert had a secret that would shatter the foundation of everything I thought I knew about our marriage. 3 years into our marriage, Robert had a brief affair with a woman named Stephanie. He confessed after she threatened to tell me herself, and it nearly destroyed us. I was devastated, but Robert promised it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that he deeply regretted. He ended the relationship immediately and spent months earning back my trust through therapy, honesty, and patience. Against the advice of some friends and family, I chose to forgive him. We rebuilt our marriage, or so I thought. I never imagined Stephanie would resurface in our lives again, let alone at my baby shower. When I got pregnant, Robert was ecstatic. He attended every doctor's appointment, talked to my belly every night, and even helped plan my baby shower. It was supposed to be a joyous celebration, a time to feel loved and supported by friends and family as we prepared to welcome our child into the world. But the cracks in our seemingly perfect relationship had started to show long before the baby shower. A few months into my pregnancy, I noticed Robert had become increasingly distracted. He'd leave the room to take phone calls, his work trips seemed unusually frequent, and his phone was suddenly glued to his hand. When I asked about it, he always had a plausible explanation, and I tried to brush off my suspicions as hormonal paranoia. The baby shower was a collaborative effort between my sister, and my closest friends. They wanted everything to be perfect, from the pastel decorations to the custom cupcakes and baby-themed games. Robert played his part, too, helping coordinate the guest list and even surprising me with a stunning flower arrangement on the morning of the party. I was surrounded by love that day. My family and friends filled the room with laughter, excitement, and well wishes for our growing family. It was exactly the kind of moment I had dreamed of, until Stephanie walked in. I spotted her immediately. She was standing near the doorway, dressed impeccably and holding a gift bag. At first, I thought she was someone's plus one. But as she made her way across the room, her eyes locked on mine, and my stomach dropped. I froze, my mind racing. How did she know about the shower? Who had invited her? Before I could process it, she spoke loudly enough for the room to go silent. "Congratulations, Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I just wanted to wish you the best with your new baby, and your husband." The room went deathly quiet. My sister immediately moved to intervene, but Stephanie raised her hand and continued. "You deserve to know the truth. Robert and I have been seeing each other for months. He told me he'd leave you after the baby was born." Gasps erupted around the room. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Robert, who had been standing near the refreshments table, looked pale as a ghost. He tried to speak, but no words came out. "Get out," my sister snapped, stepping between Stephanie and me. "You've done enough." Stephanie smirked, dropped the gift bag on the table, and walked out, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and my shattered heart. The rest of the party was a blur. Guests awkwardly excused themselves, offering sympathetic glances as they left. My sister and a few close friends stayed to comfort me while Robert tried to explain himself. He swore up and down that Stephanie was lying, that she was trying to sabotage our marriage out of spite. But the look in his eyes told me there was more to the story. That night, after everyone had gone, I demanded the truth. Robert finally confessed that Stephanie's claims were partially true. He hadn't been seeing her for months, it had only been a few weeks, and he had ended it as soon as he realized she was becoming unhinged. He insisted he never promised to leave me and that he'd been trying to cut all ties with her when she found out about the baby. I didn't know what to believe. The betrayal was too fresh, the pain too raw. I asked him to leave the house that night, and he didn't fight me on it. For the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if we'd make it through. The next morning, I woke up to a flood of messages from friends and family. Some were supportive, others judgmental. Stephanie's name was on everyone's lips, and the humiliation was unbearable. My sister came over with coffee and pastries, insisting I take the day to rest and process everything. Robert, meanwhile, sent me a long text apologizing and begging for another chance. He promised to go back to therapy, to do whatever it took to make things right. But this time, I wasn't sure if I had it in me to forgive him. As I sat in the nursery, surrounded by tiny clothes and baby toys, I thought about the future. My baby deserved a stable, loving home, and I needed to decide whether that future included Robert or not. It's been weeks since the baby's shower, and I'm still piecing my life back together. Robert and I are in counseling again, but this time, I'm approaching it with caution. I'm focusing on myself and my baby, putting my needs first for the first time in years. Whether or not our marriage survives remains to be seen, but one thing is certain, I'll never ignore my intuition again. Update 1. Nearly a month after the baby's shower, I thought the worst was behind me. I was starting to find my footing, focusing on self-care and preparing for my baby's arrival. But then, Stephanie dropped another bombshell that shook me to my core. It started with a text message. The number was unfamiliar, but the message was unmistakable. Evelyn, you deserve to know the whole truth. I'm pregnant, and it's Robert's baby. My heart stopped. I read and reread the message, hoping I had misunderstood. But there it was, plain as day. My hands were trembling as I dialed Robert's number. He picked up immediately, sounding hopeful, but I didn't give him a chance to speak. She's pregnant. Is it true? I asked, my voice cracking. There was a long pause. Then, in a barely audible voice, he admitted it. I don't know for sure, but it's possible. I'm sorry, Evelyn. I didn't know she would do this. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. I hung up the phone without another word and collapsed onto the couch. My sister found me an hour later, sobbing uncontrollably. Stephanie wasn't content with just sending me a text. Later, she showed up at my house unannounced. My sister intercepted her at the door. I heard the shouting from the living room and my sister threatening to call the police if she didn't leave. I'm not leaving until Evelyn hears me out, Stephanie shot back. She deserves to know the truth about the man she's married to. Against my sister's protests, I stepped outside. I needed answers. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. I want Robert to take responsibility, Stephanie said. I'm keeping this baby, and he needs to step up. You should know who he really is. I already know who he is, I snapped. Now get off my property. My sister ushered her away, threatening to call the police if she didn't leave. But the damage was done. The stress of the confrontation sent me into a panic, and I felt a sharp pain in my abdomen. Moments later, my water broke. I was rushed to the hospital, terrified for my baby. It was too early, I was only 35 weeks along. The doctors rushed me into the maternity ward, monitoring both me and the baby closely. The stress and emotional upheaval of the past few days had likely triggered my early labor, and all I could do was hope that my child would be safe. My sister stayed by my side, holding my hand and reassuring me through the contractions. I couldn't bring myself to call Robert at first, but my sister eventually took my phone and let him know what was happening. He arrived at the hospital within an hour, looking disheveled and panicked. Evelyn, I'm so sorry, he said as he stepped into the room. His voice cracked with emotion, but I couldn't bear to look at him. I was too angry, too hurt, and too focused on the life I was about to bring into the world. The labor was complicated but manageable. After several hours of pain and fear, my baby boy was born. He was small, fragile, and needed to be taken to the NICU immediately, but the doctors assured me he was strong and would likely make a full recovery. Seeing him for the first time, even through the haze of exhaustion, brought tears to my eyes. He was perfect, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. The next morning, I woke up in my hospital room to find Robert sitting by my bed. He looked like he hadn't slept, his face etched with guilt and concern. I need to explain, he began softly. I've made so many mistakes, Evelyn, but I love you and our son more than anything. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I didn't respond right away. My mind was swirling with everything that had happened, the betrayal, the humiliation, and now the uncertainty of our future. What about Stephanie? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She called me this morning, Robert admitted. She's keeping the baby, but I've made it clear that my priority is you and our family. I'll handle my responsibilities to her child, but I want to be here for you, for us." The thought of co-parenting with his mistress made my stomach churn. "I don't know if I can do this, Robert," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I don't know if I can trust you again, or if I even want to try." My sister arrived shortly after, sensing the tension in the room. She suggested Robert leave so I could rest and process everything, and for once, he didn't argue. He kissed my forehead, whispered another apology, and left the room. The days that followed were some of the most challenging of my life. Between visiting my son in the NICU and grappling with the chaos Robert had brought into our lives, I felt like I was barely holding on. But with my sister's support and the love of my friends and family, I started to find moments of clarity. I knew I needed to make a decision about my marriage, but I also knew it wasn't one I could rush. For now, my focus was on my son and giving him the best possible start in life. As for Robert and Stephanie, their drama would have to take a back seat, at least until I was ready to face it head-on. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I had. And for the sake of my son, I was determined to make the best of it. Update 2. The days after my son's birth were some of the hardest I'd ever endured, but they also brought clarity. The betrayal, humiliation, and endless stress had taken enough from me. I decided it was time to take control of my narrative, not let Robert or Stephanie define my future. While I focused on my son's recovery in the NICU, my sister took it upon herself to dig into Stephanie's story. Something about her didn't add up. Her sudden appearance at the baby shower, the dramatic pregnancy reveal, it all felt too calculated. My sister started with social media, piecing together a timeline of Stephanie's life over the past year. What she found was heartbreaking and infuriating. Stephanie's social media revealed that she had been in an unstable relationship with a man who was clearly toxic. There were veiled posts about being trapped with someone who wouldn't step up and vague complaints about feeling unsupported. My sister also uncovered that Stephanie's boyfriend had a reputation for being a deadbeat, unemployed, irresponsible, and nowhere near ready to become a parent. It all began to make sense. Stephanie's sudden reappearance in our lives wasn't about love or even revenge. She was desperate. She saw Robert, with his stable career and willingness to take responsibility, as her escape plan. By making him believe he was the father, she was trying to secure a better future for herself and her unborn child. With my sister's help, I hired a lawyer and a private investigator. If Stephanie was playing dirty, I could play smarter. The investigator uncovered that Stephanie had lied about the timing of her pregnancy. All evidence pointed to her being further along than she claimed, making it impossible for Robert to be the father. When I confronted Robert with the evidence, he was floored. For the first time in months, he seemed to truly understand the mess his actions had created, not just for me, but for himself as well. He vowed to take responsibility for the hurt he had caused and agreed to let me handle Stephanie on my terms. I invited Stephanie to meet me at a local cafe. She arrived with a nervous smile, clearly expecting me to beg for answers or offer her some kind of deal. Instead, I slid the medical records across the table, my expression unreadable. "This isn't Robert's baby," I said plainly. "And you knew it all along?" Stephanie's face fell, her mask of confidence cracking. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "The father is a loser. He can't even hold down a job, let alone raise a baby. I thought Robert would be a better father, a better provider. I just wanted my baby to have a chance." Her words, while pitiful, didn't soften my resolve. "I understand wanting the best for your child," I replied. "But dragging my family into your mess was cruel and selfish. You've done enough damage, and it ends now." Stephanie tried to plead with me, but I held firm. "Stay out of my life. And if you try to contact me or Robert again, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done, including your boyfriend." Her shoulders slumped, and she finally left, defeated. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. With Stephanie out of the picture, I turned my attention to Robert. I told him I needed time to think and asked him to move out while I focused on myself and my son. Over the next few months, I worked with a therapist, reconnected with old friends, and rediscovered the strength I thought I'd lost. Robert worked hard to prove himself, attending individual therapy, taking full accountability, and giving me the space I needed. But I knew that forgiveness, if it came, would be on my terms. 6 months later, my son was thriving, and so was I. Robert and I were co-parenting amicably, but I had chosen to prioritize my independence and happiness. I wasn't ready to reconcile, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. As for Stephanie, she disappeared from our lives entirely. Word eventually got out that her boyfriend had abandoned her shortly after learning she'd tried to pass the baby off as Robert's. She was now left to navigate the consequences of her actions on her own. Standing in my son's nursery one evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be.
Am I wrong for not helping my parents financially after they paid for my brother's lavish wedding? I never thought I'd be writing about this, but here I am. For as long as I can remember, my younger brother, Eric, has been the golden child. My parents always favored him, and while it was frustrating growing up, I learned to accept it. I was the eldest, the responsible one, the one expected to fend for myself while Eric got everything handed to him. Still, I never imagined things would escalate to this point. Eric and I grew up in a middle-class family. Our parents worked hard, but money was always tight. I learned early on to be independent. I worked part-time jobs during high school, earned scholarships for college, and moved out as soon as I could. Meanwhile, Eric coasted through life. He barely passed his classes, never held a job for more than a few months, and spent most of his 20s living at home. Despite all this, my parents treated him like he could do no wrong. Last year, Eric announced he was getting married to Sophia, a woman from a wealthy family. My parents were over the moon. They saw this as an opportunity for Eric to marry up and improve his life. From the moment the engagement was announced, it was all they could talk about. They wanted to give Eric and Sophia the wedding of their dreams, no matter the cost. I was happy for Eric, but I was also concerned. My parents had little savings, and I knew they couldn't afford an extravagant wedding. I voiced my concerns, but they brushed me off, saying this was a once-in-a-lifetime event, and they wanted to make it special. I tried to reason with them, suggesting they plan a modest wedding within their means, but they wouldn't listen. They were determined to impress Sophia's family. The wedding planning spiraled out of control. My parents dipped into their retirement savings, took out a loan, and even sold some of their belongings to cover the costs. They booked a fancy venue, hired a live band, and spent a fortune on flowers, catering, and decorations. Eric, of course, did nothing to contribute. He insisted he couldn't help financially because he was starting a new life and needed to save money for his future. The wedding day was as grand as my parents had hoped. Sophia's family seemed impressed, and Eric basked in the attention. My parents beamed with pride, acting like they had pulled off a miracle. I tried to be supportive, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this would come back to haunt them. And I was right. A few months after the wedding, my parents approached me with a request. They admitted they were struggling financially and asked if I could help them out. They needed money to cover their living expenses and pay off the loan they had taken for Eric's wedding. I was stunned. They had spent everything on Eric's big day, and now expected me to bail them out. I told them I couldn't help. I work hard for my money and have my own expenses to manage. I also reminded them that they had made the decision to spend beyond their means, despite my warnings. My parents were furious. They accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. They said it was my duty as their eldest child to take care of them. What angered me the most was that Eric refused to help. He told my parents he couldn't afford to support them because he was focused on building his life with Sophia. He even had the audacity to say it was my responsibility as the older sibling. My parents defended him, saying he was still young and needed time to establish himself. I lost my temper. I reminded them that I was only 3 years older than Eric and had been financially independent for years. I pointed out that Eric had never contributed to the family and that they had enabled his entitlement by always prioritizing his needs over mine. My parents didn't want to hear it. They accused me of being jealous of Eric and holding grudges from the past. The situation has caused a huge rift in the family. My parents have been telling relatives that I abandoned them in their time of need. Some of my aunts and uncles have reached out to berate me, saying I should be grateful for everything my parents did for me. But when I explain the full story, some of them understand my perspective and agree that my parents were irresponsible. Eric, of course, is living his best life. He and Sophia recently bought a new house, which I suspect her family helped pay for. He has no intention of helping our parents and doesn't seem to feel any guilt about it. Meanwhile, my parents are struggling to make ends meet, and I'm being painted as the villain for refusing to clean up their mess. I've thought a lot about this situation and whether I'm in the wrong. I love my parents, but I can't condone their poor financial decisions or their favoritism toward Eric. I've worked hard to build a stable life for myself, and I refuse to jeopardize that because they chose to prioritize appearances over practicality. Recently, my parents reached out again, asking if I would reconsider helping them. They said they were desperate and didn't know where else to turn. I told them I could offer some advice on budgeting and finding financial assistance, but I couldn't give them money. They were disappointed, but I think they're starting to realize that they need to take responsibility for their actions. Update: it all came to a head at a family gathering a few weeks ago. My parents invited me over, supposedly to spend time as a family, but it quickly turned into an ambush. They brought up the financial help again, this time with Eric chiming in. He had the nerve to accuse me of being selfish and abandoning the family. He claimed I was making things harder for everyone, especially him, by not stepping up. I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him, in front of everyone, that he was the selfish one. I laid it all out. the wedding costs, his refusal to help, and how he let our parents sink into debt while living his best life. The room went silent. Sophia, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke up. She asked what debt I was talking about. Eric tried to brush it off, but I wasn't going to let him escape. I told Sophia everything, how my parents drained their savings and took out loans to fund the wedding. I also mentioned that Eric had exaggerated his financial situation to make himself look better to her family. Sophia's face turned pale. She asked Eric if it was true, and when he couldn't deny it, she stormed out. The fallout was immediate. Sophia went home to her parents and refused to speak to Eric for days. My parents were furious with me for ruining the evening and embarrassing Eric, but I felt no guilt. The truth needed to come out, and Eric needed to face the consequences of his actions. A few days later, Sophia reached out to me. She apologized for not realizing the full extent of what had been happening. She told me she had confronted Eric, and he admitted everything. Her family had no idea about the debt, and they were furious. Sophia made it clear that she wasn't going to leave Eric, but she also wasn't going to let him coast through life anymore. To my surprise, Sophia took charge of the situation. She helped Eric set up a small business to start paying back my parents. It wasn't easy, and Eric hated it at first, but Sophia refused to let him slack off. She told him that if he wanted their marriage to work, he needed to prove he could be responsible. Meanwhile, I decided to help my parents in small ways. I started buying them groceries and helping them manage their budget. I made it clear that I wouldn't be giving them cash or bailing them out of their debt, but I wasn't going to let them starve either. It wasn't an easy decision, but I felt it was the right thing to do. Over time, things began to improve. Eric's business started doing well enough for him to make regular payments to my parents. He still wasn't contributing much emotionally or physically, but at least he was finally helping financially. My parents, while still hurt by my refusal to give them money, started to see the bigger picture. They even apologized for putting so much on my shoulders, and admitted they had been unfair to me. As for me, I've decided to keep my distance from Eric. I'll be civil for the sake of family gatherings, but I can't see myself ever having a close relationship with him again. The trust is gone, and I doubt it will ever come back. Still, I'm glad that, in the end, my parents are getting the help they need, and Eric is finally learning what it means to be responsible. Looking back, I don't regret standing my ground. It was painful, but it was necessary. Sometimes, the only way people learn is when they're forced to face the consequences of their actions. And while I'll never forget the hurt my family caused me, I'm determined to move forward and focus on building a better future for myself.
I found out my partner secretly paid off their ex's debt behind my back. When I first started dating Jake, everything felt perfect. He was kind, thoughtful, and made me feel like I was the center of his world. But there was one thing about him that always made me uncomfortable: his relationship with his ex, Melissa. From the beginning, he was upfront about them being friends. He assured me there was nothing romantic between them anymore and that they had simply stayed close after their breakup. At first, I tried to be understanding. I didn't want to be the insecure girlfriend who demanded he cut ties with someone who had once been important to him. But Melissa's presence in our lives was constant. She wasn't just a casual friend who popped in every now and then. She was always there, texting him, calling him, and even showing up to hangouts that were supposed to be just us. It was like she never really left. There were little things that started to chip away at my confidence. For example, when Jake and I went out to dinner one night, Melissa called him 3 times in a row because she was upset about something at work. Instead of silencing his phone, he excused himself to take her call, leaving me sitting at the table alone for nearly 20 minutes. When he came back, he shrugged it off like it was no big deal and said she just needed someone to vent to. I tried to talk to him about it, but he brushed my concerns aside. He insisted their relationship was completely platonic and that I had nothing to worry about. Melissa and I have history, he said, but it's in the past. You're my present and future. It sounded reassuring at the time, but his actions didn't match his words. Things escalated when Melissa began inviting Jake to events without including me. There was a time she hosted a birthday dinner and didn't extend an invitation to me, even though Jake and I had been dating for over a year. Jake went anyway, saying he didn't want to hurt her feelings. I was left at home, feeling like an outsider in my own relationship. I started questioning myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was I jealous for no reason? Jake made me feel like my insecurities were the problem. He'd say things like, "You need to trust me," or "Melissa is like family to me." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about their dynamic. It didn't help that Melissa seemed to enjoy pushing boundaries. She'd post old photos of them together on social media with captions like, "Back when life was simpler," or comment on his posts with inside jokes I didn't understand. The breaking point came about 6 months ago. Jake and I were saving up for a trip we'd been planning for years, a dream vacation to Italy. We'd been setting aside money every month, cutting back on luxuries, and even picking up extra shifts at work to make it happen. Then, out of nowhere, Jake told me we'd need to postpone the trip. He said something had come up, but he wouldn't tell me what. I was confused and hurt. We'd worked so hard to save for this trip, and now it was being pushed aside without any explanation. I tried to press him for details, but he just said, "It's personal. Please trust me on this." That was when I started noticing changes in his behavior. He seemed more distant, preoccupied, and anxious. He was taking more calls from Melissa than usual and even meeting up with her more frequently. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. While Jake was in the shower, his phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. It read, "Thanks again for everything. I don't know what I'd do without you." My stomach dropped. I knew I shouldn't invade his privacy, but I needed answers. I opened the text thread, hoping to find proof of infidelity, but what I found instead were screenshots of bank transfers. Each one was from Jake to Melissa, with captions like "hang in there" and "hope this helps." My heart sank as I realized the amounts totaled thousands of dollars, more than enough to wipe out the savings we'd been building for our trip. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. He wasn't just helping her, he was financially supporting her behind my back. My mind raced with questions. Why would he do this? What was so important that he'd jeopardize our plans and betray my trust? I confronted him as soon as he got out of the shower, and at first, he tried to deny it. But when I showed him the evidence, he finally admitted the truth. Melissa had gotten herself into debt after losing her job. She'd turned to Jake for help, and he felt obligated to step in. "She has no one else," he said. I couldn't just stand by and let her struggle. I asked him why he hadn't come to me about it, and his response floored me. "I knew you wouldn't understand," he said. "You've always been jealous of her, and I didn't want to cause more problems." I was furious. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust and respect. He'd made a decision that affected both of us without consulting me. Worse, he'd chosen to prioritize his ex's well-being over our relationship. I told him I needed time to think and left the apartment that night. Over the next few days, I stayed with a friend and tried to sort through my feelings. Part of me wanted to believe Jake's intentions were pure, but another part of me couldn't ignore the pattern of behavior that had plagued our relationship from the start. Melissa had always been a presence between us, and now it was clear she wasn't going anywhere. Jake called and texted repeatedly, begging me to come home so we could talk. He said he loved me and didn't want to lose me, but his words felt hollow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd always be competing with Melissa for his attention and loyalty. I finally agreed to meet Jake a week later. He apologized profusely, saying he never meant to hurt me and just wanted to help someone who had been a big part of his life. He insisted there was nothing romantic between him and Melissa and that he only acted out of a sense of responsibility. But as much as I wanted to believe him, I couldn't ignore how his choices had eroded my trust. I told him how hurt I was, how I felt second to someone who shouldn't even be a part of our lives anymore. Jake asked if we could start fresh, promising to cut ties with Melissa and focus solely on us. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, and a part of me wanted to say yes. I still had strong feelings for him, and the idea of walking away from everything we'd built together was heartbreaking. But the betrayal lingered. If he could keep something this significant from me, what else could he hide? Could I ever feel secure in a relationship where I had to question his priorities? As I walked away from our conversation, I found myself more conflicted than ever. My heart was telling me to stay, but my mind couldn't forget the pain he had caused. For now, all I know is that I need time to decide if love is enough to outweigh the loss of trust. Update 1. After our conversation, I decided to give Jake another chance, cautiously. I told him he had to prove that I came first, that our relationship meant more than his sense of obligation to Melissa. He agreed, saying he would cut all contact with her. He even offered to show me his messages and block her number to regain my trust. For a while, it seemed like we might have a chance to rebuild. I moved back into the apartment, though things were still fragile between us. We both knew it would take time and effort to heal. Jake was being attentive, trying to show me he was committed to us. I wanted to believe him so badly. Despite everything, I still loved him, and I thought maybe we could get past this. Then Melissa showed up. It happened on a quiet Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard a knock at the door. Jake glanced at me nervously and said, "I'll get it." Something in his tone immediately put me on edge. When he opened the door, there she was, Melissa, standing there like she owned the place. She didn't even glance at me as she pushed her way inside, holding up her phone and saying, "Jake, I need to talk to you. This is serious." My heart sank. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to show up unannounced, especially after everything. Before Jake could respond, I stepped forward and said, "What the hell are you doing here?" Melissa finally looked at me, her expression cold and dismissive. "This doesn't concern you," she said flatly. "Oh, it absolutely does," I shot back. You've been a constant issue in our relationship, and Jake promised he was done with you. So, again, what are you doing here? Jake tried to intervene, holding up his hands. Melissa, I told you not to come here. Whatever it is, we'll talk about it later. Melissa ignored him and turned back to me. I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this. Jake and I have been friends for years, and that's not going to change just because you're insecure. That was the breaking point. I exploded. Insecure? Are you kidding me? You've crossed every boundary imaginable. You've treated him like he's still your boyfriend and me like I'm some temporary inconvenience. The argument escalated quickly. Melissa accused me of trying to control Jake, saying I didn't understand their history. I fired back, pointing out how she'd manipulated him and taken advantage of his kindness. Jake stood there, frozen, as we yelled at each other. Finally, I turned to Jake and said, "This is it. I can't do this anymore. If you're not willing to stand up to her, then there's no future for us." Jake looked torn, but he didn't say a word. His silence spoke volumes. I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, my heart breaking with every step. Jake called after me, but I didn't stop. I knew in that moment that our relationship was over. It's been a few weeks since that day, and I've moved in with a friend while I figure out my next steps. Jake has tried reaching out, leaving voicemails and texts apologizing for what happened. He said he cut off all contact with Melissa, but it's too little, too late. I realized that no matter how much I loved Jake, I couldn't be with someone who allowed another person to disrespect me in our relationship. Love isn't enough when trust and boundaries are repeatedly broken. I'm still grieving the loss of what we had, but I know I made the right decision. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm putting myself first. And honestly, it feels good. Update 2. It's been several months since I walked away from Jake, and life has slowly started to come back together. After the initial heartbreak, I threw myself into work, focusing on my career and rebuilding my savings. The trip to Italy that Jake and I had dreamed about was something I couldn't stop thinking about. It represented everything I had been working toward before our relationship fell apart. So, I decided to make it happen on my own. With the money I'd been setting aside, combined with some extra freelance projects I picked up, I finally saved enough to book the trip. It felt empowering to reclaim something that had been overshadowed by betrayal and disappointment. The planning process became a bright spot in an otherwise difficult period. Every detail I arranged, choosing the perfect Airbnb in Florence, researching the best gelato spots, mapping out a visit to the Colosseum, was a reminder that I didn't need anyone else to create happiness for myself. As for Jake, I hadn't heard much from him after I blocked his number and cut ties for good. But the world has a funny way of delivering news you're not looking for. A mutual friend casually mentioned during a group hangout that Jake and Melissa were back together. I felt a mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me was angry that he had gone back to the person who had caused so much damage to our relationship. Another part of me felt pity. Melissa had taken so much from him, emotionally and financially, and now he was willingly stepping back into that dynamic. Our friend added, "Honestly, it seems like a mess. They're always arguing. Melissa is still dealing with her financial issues, and Jake's exhausted trying to keep up with her needs. He doesn't seem happy." Hearing that confirmed what I already knew. Walking away was the best decision I could have made. As much as it hurt to leave Jake, staying would have meant losing myself. I leave for Italy in 2 weeks, and I can't wait. This trip isn't just a vacation, it's a symbol of everything I've overcome. It's a reminder that I can move forward, even when life doesn't go as planned. Looking back, I've realized that the relationship with Jake taught me valuable lessons about boundaries, self-respect, and knowing when to let go. I still have moments where I miss the good times we shared, but I don't regret walking away. As for Jake and Melissa, I wish them the best, even if their relationship seems doomed to repeat the same cycle. I've moved on, and I'm finally focusing on myself, and for the first time in a long time, that feels more than enough. Final update. After my trip to Italy, I returned home feeling refreshed and renewed. The trip was everything I had dreamed it would be and more. Wandering through the cobblestone streets of Rome, standing in awe of the Sistine Chapel, and savoring the most incredible pasta in a little tucked-away trattoria made me feel like I had reclaimed a piece of myself I thought I'd lost. Life had been peaceful since my return, and I had truly started to feel like I was moving forward. That was until I ran into Jake one random Saturday afternoon while grocery shopping. I was in the produce aisle, carefully picking out avocados, when I turned around and saw him. He was standing there with a basket in hand, looking just as surprised as I felt. "Hey," he said, hesitantly. I nodded. "Hey." It was awkward, to say the least. We made small talk for a minute. He asked how I'd been, and I told him about the Italy trip, though I kept it vague. He mentioned that things had been up and down lately, but he didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. After a polite but brief exchange, I said I had to go and left, thinking that would be the end of it. But later that evening, I received a long text message from Jake. "Hi, I know running into you today was unexpected, and I didn't get to say what I really wanted to. I've been doing a lot of thinking since we broke up, and I just need to get this off my chest. First, I want to apologize, really apologize, for everything I put you through. You didn't deserve the way I prioritized Melissa over you, the secrets, or the financial betrayal. I see now how much I took you for granted, and it's one of my biggest regrets. Melissa and I are no longer together. Things fell apart a few months ago, and honestly, I should have seen it coming. She took advantage of me, and I let her because I thought I owed her something. But in doing so, I lost someone who truly cared about me. You were right about so many things, and I wish I had listened to you. I was blinded by guilt and loyalty to Melissa, and I didn't see how much it was hurting you, and us. I heard about your trip to Italy, and I'm glad you went. You deserve to be happy, and I hope you're doing well. I don't expect you to forgive me or let me back into your life, but I just wanted you to know how sorry I am. You were an amazing partner, and I'll always regret losing you. Take care." Reading that message brought a flood of emotions, sadness, anger, relief, but most of all, it brought closure. For so long, I had been carrying the weight of what happened, wondering if I had done the right thing by leaving. Jake's message confirmed that I had. I didn't respond right away. I took a few days to process everything before finally writing back. "Thank you for your message, Jake. I'm sorry things didn't work out for you, but I'm glad you've had time to reflect. I hope this helps you grow and find happiness in the future. I've moved on, and I hope you do, too. Take care." It felt good to finally close that chapter of my life with no lingering bitterness or resentment. Jake's apology didn't erase the pain he caused, but it gave me the peace I needed to move forward fully. Since then, I haven't heard from Jake again, and I'm okay with that. I've started to focus more on myself and my goals, whether it's planning my next adventure, advancing in my career, or simply enjoying the little things in life. For anyone who might be going through something similar, know this: you are worth more than being someone's second choice. You deserve a love that's unwavering, a relationship built on trust, and a partner who chooses you every single day. I've learned to choose myself, and I've never been happier. My fiancé's mother wants to wear white to our wedding, and he sides with her. When I first met my future mother-in-law, Carol, I knew she was going to be a handful. She's always been overbearing, opinionated, and far too involved in my fiancé Mark's life. At first, I chalked it up to her being a protective mother. But over the years, her behavior has crossed so many lines that I've lost count. I love Mark, but his inability to set boundaries with her has caused more arguments than I care to admit. One of the first major incidents was when we moved in together. Carol showed up unannounced every other day with groceries, decorations, and unsolicited advice on how to properly run a household. She criticized everything from my cooking to the way I arranged furniture. When I gently suggested that she call before coming over, she burst into tears and accused me of trying to steal her son away. Then there was the time she insisted on planning Mark's birthday party. I had already organized a small gathering with his closest friends, but Carol swooped in, booked a fancy restaurant, and sent out invitations without consulting either of us. When I confronted her, she said, "Well, I'm his mother. Of course, I'll do it better than you." Mark's response? "That's just how she is. She means well." I've tried to keep the peace for Mark's sake, but her latest stunt has pushed me to my breaking point. A few weeks ago, we were discussing wedding plans. I was excited to share details about the venue, the flowers, and, most importantly, my dress. Carol, however, seemed less interested in listening and more interested in offering unsolicited advice. She scoffed at the idea of an outdoor ceremony, said my choice of blush pink bridesmaid dresses was too trendy, and then dropped the bombshell: "I'll be wearing white, of course. It's a family tradition." I thought I misheard her at first. "You're wearing white?" I asked, incredulous. "Yes," she replied matter-of-factly. "The mother of the groom always wears white in our family. It's a sign of unity." I glanced at Mark, expecting him to step in and shut this down. Instead, he shrugged and said, "If it's important to her, why not?" "Why not?" "Because it's wildly inappropriate, that's why." I tried to explain to both of them that wearing white is traditionally reserved for the bride and that it would make me uncomfortable. Carol rolled her eyes and said, "Don't be so old-fashioned. It's 2024. Mark, meanwhile, accused me of overreacting and said I was making a big deal out of nothing. The argument spiraled from there. I pointed out that Carol's behavior has been a consistent problem throughout our relationship and that this was just another example of her overstepping boundaries. Mark defended her, saying she's just excited and doesn't mean any harm. I couldn't believe he was taking her side over mine, especially when it came to something as important as our wedding day. After a few days of tension, I decided to talk to Carol directly. I invited her out for coffee and tried to explain how I felt in a calm and respectful manner. I told her I understood she wanted to be part of the wedding, but wearing white would overshadow me on my special day. Her response? If you're so insecure that you can't share the spotlight for one day, maybe you're not ready to get married. I was stunned. I've always tried to be patient with Carol, but this felt like a deliberate attack. When I told Mark what happened, he brushed it off and said, "You're both being dramatic. Just let her wear what she wants." That's when I started questioning everything. If Mark couldn't stand up for me now, how could I trust him to have my back in the future? This isn't just about a dress, it's about respect and boundaries. I'm not marrying his mother, but it's starting to feel like she'll always have the final say in our lives. As the wedding day approaches, the tension has only escalated. Carol has been telling relatives that I'm controlling and trying to exclude her from the wedding. She's even hinted that she might not attend if she can't wear white. Part of me hopes she follows through on that threat, but I know it would devastate Mark. I've reached a breaking point. I love Mark, but I'm starting to wonder if love is enough. If he's unwilling to stand up to his mother now, what happens when bigger issues arise? I've tried talking to him, but he insists I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. He says he doesn't want to hurt her feelings, but what about mine? The wedding is only a month away, and I'm at a loss. Do I let Carol have her way and risk resenting both her and Mark? Or do I stand my ground and risk a full-blown family feud? I've never felt so torn. Part of me wants to call off the wedding entirely, but I'm terrified of what that would mean for my relationship with Mark. Right now, all I know is that something has to change. Whether it's Mark's attitude, Carol's behavior, or my own willingness to put up with this nonsense, I can't keep going like this. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, but right now, I feel like I'm fighting this battle alone. Update 1. I decided to leave the apartment to take some time to think. I was lucky enough to be able to stay with a friend, but Mark showed up at my friend's house the next morning. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept at all. To my surprise, the first words out of his mouth were, "I'm sorry." Mark admitted he had been wrong to dismiss my feelings. He said he had been so focused on keeping the peace with his mother that he hadn't realized how much it was hurting me. For the first time, he acknowledged that Carol's behavior was out of line and that he had failed to set boundaries. I told him that while I appreciated his apology, words weren't enough. I needed to see real change. I asked him if he was willing to go to therapy, both individually and as a couple. He hesitated for a moment but then agreed. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right," he said. We also talked about the wedding. I told him I couldn't move forward with it under the current circumstances. He agreed that putting it on hold indefinitely was the right decision. He even suggested we use the time to work on our relationship and figure out how to handle his mother moving forward. A few days later, Mark made a big decision. He told Carol he was going no contact for the time being. He explained to her that her behavior had caused significant damage to our relationship and that he needed space to focus on fixing things with me. Carol, predictably, did not take it well. She called him ungrateful and accused me of brainwashing him. But Mark stood his ground, and for the first time, I felt like he was truly on my side. Since then, we've started therapy, and it's been a game changer. Mark is finally unpacking the unhealthy dynamic he has with his mother, and I'm learning to communicate my needs more effectively. It's not an easy process, but it feels like we're making real progress. As for Carol, she's still spreading rumors and playing the victim. But honestly, I don't care anymore. For the first time in years, I feel like Mark and I are a team. The wedding may be on hold, but our relationship is stronger than it's ever been. And that's what really matters. Update 2. Going no contact with Carol was the right decision for us, but I'd be lying if I said it was easy. For weeks, she ramped up her efforts to get Mark to cave. She sent endless texts and emails filled with guilt trips and accusations. She even showed up at his workplace demanding to see him. Mark held firm, but the stress started to take its toll. Things escalated one weekend when Mark and I returned to the apartment after running errands. We found Carol standing outside our door with a suitcase. She claimed she had nowhere else to go because Mark's father was siding with us and had asked her to leave their house temporarily. She demanded to be let inside so she could sort things out. Mark calmly but firmly told her this wasn't the time or place. He offered to help her find a hotel for the night, but she refused. She screamed at him, accusing him of abandoning her and choosing me over his own mother. When he wouldn't budge, she turned her anger on me, calling me a manipulative witch who had ruined her family. Neighbors started peeking out of their doors, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. Mark refused to engage further and told her to leave before he called the police. Carol eventually stormed off, but not before shouting that we'd regret this. The next day, we discovered she had left a barrage of voicemails for both of us. In one particularly unhinged message, she threatened to expose the truth about me to Mark's extended family and friends. The truth, of course, was nothing more than fabricated nonsense about me being controlling and alienating Mark from his family. Mark listened to the messages with a stoic expression, but I could see the pain and frustration in his eyes. Despite the emotional toll, Mark remained firm in his decision to stay no contact. He blocked Carol on all platforms and warned his father about her escalating behavior. To our relief, Mark's father assured us that he supported Mark's boundaries and would not let Carol use him as a pawn in her games. A few weeks later, things took an even darker turn. One evening, we returned home to find our apartment door scratched and a bouquet of dead flowers taped to it. The card attached read, "You'll never replace me." It was chilling, to say the least. We immediately called the police and filed a report. While we couldn't prove it was Carol, we both knew who was responsible. The incident served as a wake-up call for Mark. He realized that his mother's behavior had gone beyond manipulation and guilt-tripping, it had become genuinely toxic and potentially dangerous. He decided to change his phone number and, at my urging, install security cameras around our apartment. It wasn't the life we had envisioned, but it was necessary to protect our peace. For a while, things seemed to calm down. But then came the final straw. Mark received a letter in the mail from his mother, sent through a third party to bypass the no-contact barrier. The letter was an unhinged tirade, alternating between pleas for reconciliation and outright threats. She accused Mark of being a traitor to his family and warned that he would lose everything if he didn't come crawling back to her. Mark didn't even finish reading it. He ripped it in half and threw it in the trash. "I'm done," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and sadness. "She's not my mother anymore. Not the way a mother should be." The breaking point came when Carol showed up uninvited to Mark's father's birthday party, where we had decided to make an appearance. She cornered Mark in front of everyone and started sobbing hysterically, begging him to forgive her. When he refused, she flew into a rage, accusing him of being brainwashed and a disgrace to the family. The scene was mortifying, and Mark's father ended up escorting her out of the house. After that, Mark made it clear to the rest of his family that he wanted no updates about Carol. He told them that while he loved them, he needed to prioritize his mental health and our relationship. Most of his relatives were supportive, but a few accused him of being cruel to his mother. Mark didn't waver. For the first time, he was putting himself and us first. Therapy has continued to be a lifeline for us. Mark has made incredible progress in recognizing the unhealthy dynamics of his relationship with Carol, and I've learned to let go of the resentment I had been carrying. We've decided not to rush back into wedding planning, but we're stronger and more united than ever. As for Carol, she's still trying to stir up drama, but her influence over Mark has completely evaporated. She can scream into the void all she wants, we're finally free from her toxic grip. Our focus now is on building a future filled with love, respect, and, most importantly, boundaries. If this journey has taught me anything, it's that love isn't just about being there for each other in the good times. It's about standing together in the face of adversity, even when it comes from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. Mark and I still have a long road ahead, but for the first time, I feel like we're walking it together. And that's a future worth fighting for.